Hi, my name is Adam, and I'd like to start off with a caveat that I'm not a medical professional or someone who's trying to sell you anything. The purpose of this video is to simply share with you my experience with hyperacusis and how I personally recovered from it. If you yourself have hyperacusis, I strongly recommend you contact a neuro-otologist and audiologist in your area. So keep that in mind and take what you will from this video. My hyperacusis story started in March of 2013. I flew into New York City to visit a friend who lives in Manhattan for 5 days. We had a great time together, touring the city and watching a couple Broadway shows, and everything went well. However, after my trip was over, I flew back and got back home. And I remember laying in bed after a long day of travel and realized that I had a fairly loud ringing or buzzing in my ears that I had trouble ignoring. I've had ringing in my ears previously after concerts or a nightclub, and if I was in a completely silent room, I could sometimes faintly hear it, but not near as loud as it was that night when I got back. But I ended up shrugging it off and figured it was due to the plane ride, and figured it would just fade away in a day or two like it had in the past. The next morning, I noticed my ears were still ringing away, and I got up to the bathroom and noticed that the sound of flushing the toilet was abnormally loud, and it even hurt my ears. But I figured I just got back from a trip and wasn't used to the way things sounded, and basically just brushed it off. And it wasn't until that night at dinner when I realized I had a serious issue with my hearing. My mother dropped her fork on the plate. My mother dropped her fork on her plate, and it sent a giant wave of pain into my ears. My family immediately looked at me, questioning why I cringed so bad, and I asked them, "Was that not loud to you?" And they looked at each other in a puzzled manner and said it was loud, but it wasn't like pain-inducing loud, or like a startle inducing loud. But either way, that night I went to my room and used the internet to research what was going on with me. Why are my ears still ringing? Why are all sounds seeming abnormally loud just to me? And I remember stumbling upon the Wikipedia page for hyperacusis. I read the symptom: difficulty tolerating everyday sounds, some of which may seem unpleasantly or painfully loud to that person but not to others. And right away I knew that's what I had. I began to think back about my trip to New York City and just trying to narrow down what could have caused this. Could have been the plane ride, the Broadway shows that I saw, and then I remembered looking back on my third day in New York City. My friends and I signed up for a lottery to win tickets to one of the Broadway shows outside a theater, and we filled out the lottery card and dropped it in the box and waited out front amongst a crowd of people in front of the theater entrance right below the marquee. And when it was time to draw the names out, a theater employee stood up in front of the crowd and announced the winners of the lottery through a megaphone. And even though I was standing a good 20 to 25 feet back in front of the megaphone and surrounded by a crowd, the sound of a megaphone really hurt my ears a lot, and I couldn't get over how loud it was. Like each syllable through the megaphone sent sharp pains into my ears, and my first instinct was to cover my ears with my fingers, but when I looked around at the rest of the crowd, everyone looked unfazed by the megaphone volume, and even though standing closer up to the megaphone than I was, so I figured it was just me and I would endure it for the remaining 2 minutes, even though it hurt a lot. But after all the names were called, everyone began walking home, and I remember asking my friends who were standing next to me at the time if they thought the megaphone was extremely loud and hurt their ears as well. And they shrugged it off and said it wasn't loud enough to cause any pain, and they were completely fine. But by the time I got back to where we were staying, I had a huge headache and my ears felt really full. The fullness pretty much resumed throughout the rest of the 3 days in New York City, but I attributed it to the extreme cold temperature and kind of brushed it off, saying I may have had a head cold because it was very cold when I was there. So was it the plane ride that caused the inner ear damage that caused my hyperacusis and tinnitus, or was it the Broadway shows we saw, or was it the theater employee that spoke through the megaphone? Either way, all my friends who went with me didn't have any hearing issues, and basically they were with me my whole time in New York City. So, and either way, New York City is a loud place. And it's really impossible to pinpoint what exactly pushed me over the edge. Nevertheless, it was something that puzzled me for months. And I spent countless nights trying to figure out what specific event caused my tinnitus or ringing in the ears and hyperacusis, sensitivity to sound. And I decided I needed to be seen by a doctor, so I scheduled an appointment with my primary care physician, who I described my symptoms to. She obviously was not familiar with the sound sensitivity or hyperacusis, and explained that it was probably due to me being stressed at the time, and it could have been my body's way of reacting to the stress. She basically thought it was all in my head. It was a psychological problem. She did mention that she wanted to get a hearing test done and referred me to a ear, nose, and throat doctor. So I went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor and re-explained my symptoms. And he also was very puzzled as well. So he had my hearing tested and said it was perfect. Very minimal hearing loss, still in the normal hearing thresholds, which only made things more difficult. He said that he's seen another patient with sound sensitivity issues in the past, but there was nothing he could do. He was familiar with tinnitus. However, he explained that there is no treatment. You just have to habituate to the sound and it may never go away. He even comforted me saying that he had tinnitus himself, but it was at such a low volume where he could habituate to it and kind of just tune it out. But at the time, I just couldn't believe that there was no treatment for the tinnitus. And the hyperacusis issues I had, I may have to live like that for my entire life. It was almost as if I was having a nightmare and I couldn't wake up from. But before he rushed off out of the room, I pleaded to him how desperate I was of help. And how I could no longer go out to dinner or any sort of social settings due to my extremely sensitive hearing and how much pain it caused. And it basically just strongly impacted my life. So I asked him if he knew of an audiologist who could at least attempt to help me. And he said he would try, and contacted a nearby audiologist in the network and asked if she was familiar with the hearing issues I had. And to my relief, she said that she would like to see me and treats tinnitus and hyperacusis. Asking my ear, nose, and throat doctor to refer me to the audiologist ended up being one of the best decisions of my life. And if it wasn't for me being very adamant and asking my doctor about an audiologist, I probably would have been sent home to deal with my hearing issues on my own. And at that point, I didn't want to get my hopes up too high, considering the ear, nose, and throat doctor just said he couldn't do anything for me. But I knew that the audiologist was my last hope, and if she couldn't help me, I would have to live like this for the rest of my life, which is very depressing. The audiologist, unfortunately, was booked for months out, so I had to leave her a voicemail explaining how urgently I needed to see her. And luckily, she was able to squeeze me in for an appointment. At the start of the appointment, she gave me a questionnaire to evaluate how severely my tinnitus and hyperacusis affected my quality of life, which I, of course, ranked 100 out of 100 scale. It took over my life. And she then ran a series of tests, such as a tympanometry, a hearing test, an acoustic reflex test, which kind of hurt my ears because it was loud. But to my relief, she told me that she's had a lot of experience with tinnitus patients in the past, and even a few hyperacusis patients. She assured me after treatment my sound tolerance would improve. So then she went on to explain to me what treatment options were available for me. And the first treatment is called tinnitus retraining therapy, which uses a form of sound enrichment through the use of in-ear sound generators that would play a white noise. And basically it was like a device that looked like an iPod, where I would use special headphones to listen to white noise. And if you never heard of white noise, it's kind of like a TV static on a blank TV channel or like a blank radio channel. It's like that fuzzy sound. And I would listen to this white noise at first at low levels during the treatment, and then slowly bring up the volume little by little to retrain my brain to raise my sound tolerance, and all while masking the tinnitus or ringing in my ears. The second component of the treatment involved cognitive behavioral sessions, or CBT sessions, with a rehab psychologist who was familiar with hyperacusis and tinnitus. The bad news was that the TRT device that she had for me to use was currently being used by another patient and wouldn't be available for 2 more months. And I was incredibly frustrated because I wanted to start treatment ASAP, but I knew I was relieved at the same time, knowing that there is treatment out there for me, and I'm finally being seen by a clinician that is able to help me, or so I thought. And she even went above and beyond and referred me to a neuro-otologist in the area, which is a ear, nose, and throat doctor that specializes in neurological disorders of the ear. She had built a pretty good rapport with him, and she mentioned that he's extremely thorough and will do a comprehensive ear exam to make sure that nothing mechanically is wrong with my ears that could be causing the hyperacusis and tinnitus. And I did a little research on him, and he did his fellowship at the Chicago Institute, or Chicago Center of Dizziness and Hearing, and basically was one of the best, neuro-otology centers in the nation. So I was pretty impressed, and I went ahead and saw him, and he did a couple more tests, including a CAT scan of the temporal bone to rule out a saccular chain dislocation, as well as an acoustic neuroma, which is a tumor that grows on the auditory nerve. And the neuro-otologist said that the only thing that he could find from the test was I had some exaggerated acoustic reflexes and hypercompliant eardrums, which would not really warrant the cause of my tinnitus and hyperacusis. He mentioned that the treatment plan of tinnitus retraining therapy, combined with the cognitive behavioral therapy sessions that my audiologist scheduled for me, should help reduce my hypersensitivity to sound and improve my sound tolerance. So I asked him, will my hearing ever be back to where it was before my trip to New York City? And he said that in some cases it does, and others it doesn't. Everyone responds to treatment differently, and as a physician he cannot make any guarantees, especially with a condition that's so rare. He wished me the best and sent the results to my audiologist. Excuse me. So my audiologist called me and assured me that as soon as she gets the TRT device, or sound generator, available, I would be the first person she calls. So in the meantime, she scheduled me for cognitive behavioral therapy sessions with a rehab psychologist. And my audiologist gave me 3 very important instructions to combat my hyperacusis. First, she encouraged me not to wear hearing protection like earplugs, which I was doing to begin with just because it seemed like it was the intuitive thing to do. You know, if things are too loud, to put earplugs in. Excuse me. She said not to wear hearing protection in regular listening environments, such as in a car or at a restaurant, even those environments that would cause me discomfort. She said hearing protection is only recommended for excessively loud environments, like a rock concert or a gun range, or really any environment that exceeds 85 decibels, which is the threshold for hearing loss. And actually, she said, and I didn't know this, but the overuse of hearing protection can be detrimental to my hearing health by making my hyperacusis worse. And it's not recommended if I'm not in an excessively noisy environment that exceeds 85 decibels to wear hearing protection. So basically, cut out the earplugs, even though it didn't really seem like the right thing to do, but it made sense. So only only use earplugs when I'm not in, or only use earplugs when I'm in a very loud environment that would warrant them. But the second tip that she told me was I should listen to white or pink noise, either through my laptop speakers or through a white noise masker machine. And I purchased one when she referred me to get one. It's called the Sound and Sleep sound machine, I guess it's called. I got it on Amazon, but basically it just plays this white noise at night, or when I'm sitting in a silent room. And it masks the tinnitus, as well as provides sound enrichment for my auditory system. And she said that it was important for my auditory system to avoid being in silent environments because it starves my ears from sound, which in turn would make my sound sensitivity even worse. So basically, I need to avoid both the completely silent environments and environments that exceed 85 decibels that are, too loud, obviously. So the third thing she explained was that even though I have hyperacusis and was overly sensitive to sounds, my ears are not any more susceptible to hearing damage than a normal person without hyperacusis. So even though sounds may hurt my ears, as long as they were below 85 decibels, they wouldn't be causing any damage. Like I said, unless I was in an excessively loud sound environment like concert, a club, or something like that. So I stuck very closely to these three instructions, despite how counterintuitive they were, and in the meantime, between all these appointments, I was just a complete wreck. Anytime I would hang out with friends or go out to eat, my ears just couldn't tolerate the sound, and almost all sounds other than soft ones would hurt my ears. Basically, it was so bad that even my own voice would hurt my ears, so I began speaking very softly, which caused a lot of people to ask me to speak up or question why I was speaking so quietly. And basically, it was like someone took the volume knob on life and turned it way up. And I began resorting to staying at home in quiet environments and avoiding any social interaction so my ears wouldn't hurt. It was a very isolating time in my life. I never felt so isolated from the world. And I told my family, loved ones, and friends. And at first, they thought it was all in my head, that it was a psychological problem. Because at the time, I was going through a decent amount of stress. And it wasn't really a physical problem, especially after all the doctors I went through ran all the tests and said my hearing is fine. I didn't require surgery or for any sort of medical condition. But the thing is, hyperacusis is an invisible illness. Or in other words, no one knew about my condition unless I told them, which when I would often get replies of, um, oh wow, I've never heard of that before. You look fine." But I will say my family and friends did agree to keep down the sound levels around me, which I really appreciated. Um, but however, but basically they would like be careful not to slam doors or run the vacuum cleaner. Or my sister and mom play the piano, so they would always warn me before I play. And as expected, they often ended up forgetting to keep things down until I reminded them I was in pain, which I can't blame them for at first, because they were still getting used to keeping things at a low volume. But yeah, ever since the first night I discovered hyperacusis, I started spending all my time researching on the internet about the condition. I just couldn't get over how little information on the internet there was of this condition, and the small amount of information I could find consisted mostly of forums, mainly the Hyperacusis chat website that was filled with hundreds of posts and mostly doom and gloom stories that even made me further depressed. So I found the Hyperacusis sufferers group on Facebook. And joined. And as similar to the forum, it was filled with negativity. It was basically an outlet for people to rant how hyperacusis has ruined their lives, how much pain they were in, and how depressed they were. And I went ahead and made like a comment and reached out to the group asking what would the prognosis be for me. And I mostly received comments on how I can't be cured and I would just have to learn to live with hyperacusis because the damage is already done. One lady in particular is notorious for being very discouraging in that group, and her name's Joyce Cohen. She was the one who was featured on the 2020 episode on My Strange Affliction. And although she does a great job of raising awareness through her television feature and the articles she writes, I think she fails to realize that people can and do recover through proper treatment. She told me and many others that I would never recover and my life would never be the same. She told me that the treatment that my audiologist prescribed, the tinnitus retraining therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, doesn't work. And interestingly, um, rather almost ignorantly, she never tried the treatment out for herself, but she spoke on it. So, and this really scared me. Here's a lady who had hyperacusis for a long time, is a chronic sufferer, um, and was telling me I would never get better. And at that point, I began to seriously doubt my audiologist. And I could no longer sleep well, and I was suffering from anxiety and depression. So I went to my primary care physician again, who prescribed me sleeping pills called trazodone. And although it did make me fall asleep, the medication made me feel mentally foggy and not myself. I hated taking them, and I was afraid I would get addicted. And it was at this point where I hit an all-time low. At 20 years old, I really felt like my life was over. I could no longer hang out with friends and go out to eat and go to a movie theater and even some more far-fetched things like have children one day because they would be too noisy. And I had very little motivation to get out of bed every morning because based on all the information I found online, I couldn't even find one success story. And my doctors could not say with great certainty that I would ever get better, at least the ones that knew what the condition was. And anytime I would hear something even slightly loud, my ears would just shoot with pain. And I would get this weird sensation called oral fullness, where my ears would feel so full after sound exposure that they would seem like they could just pop. It's a similar sensation to when you're descending from an airplane and you have that pressure. I would basically get that pressure after being exposed to sound, even if it wasn't that loud, for a couple hours, few hours at a time after. So life was a living hell, and if it wasn't for my loved ones pushing me to stay busy and providing the emotional support I needed, I don't know how long I could have gone on. And it wasn't really until I had my first cognitive behavioral therapy appointment that things started to change. I'm so grateful that my psychologist was very well researched when it came to hyperacusis and tinnitus. She explained the importance to sticking to the 3 instructions my audiologist gave me, and she said that she had patients in the past who didn't stick to the 3 instructions and ended up worsening their hyperacusis. So she explained that one thing I need to work on was to learn to relax my body and lower my anxiety towards sound. And a very widespread problem, she said, that occurs with hyperacusis patients is that they feel the need to be hypervigilant and tense up and be on edge when they're around sound, even though the sound isn't loud enough to cause hearing damage. So I could definitely relate to this hypervigilant behavior because I even got into the habit of bracing myself for pain when I was about to be exposed to a sudden loud sound, such as someone about to shut a door, or a waiter picking up plates and stacking them, or even turning on the shower. And it's kind of funny, I used to flush the toilet and then run out of the bathroom as fast as I could to avoid the noise because it hurt my ears so much. She said that it was important to relax my body during these abrupt noises, and when I'm about to hear a moderately loud sound, like a door shut, I should take a deep breath out and relax my body. She said that this hypervigilance leads to my body having a fight or flight response, which only causes unnecessary anxiety towards sound, and this behavior could really take over my life if I didn't kind of cut this bad habit. And there's a thing called phonophobia, which a lot of hyperacusis patients develop, which is basically fear of sound. So although I found that this tip was very counterintuitive, it involved me allowing to have, or me kind of giving up my fear for normal sounds, it did make sense, even though I would have to grin and bear some of the pain. The second tip was to list all the things I stopped doing to my hyperacusis, such as going out to eat at restaurants, hanging out with friends, going to gym, and even just listening to music. I think I stopped listening to music for a good 2 or 3 months before finally getting to a psychologist who's telling me to get back into these things. So, um, and I just took, being able to listen to music for granted. And I didn't realize how much it was important to me until I couldn't listen to anymore, because even it just seemed like it would hurt my ears. Um, so she explained that I needed to modify my lifestyle in order to find ways to go back to what I was doing, or what I was used to doing before, such as instead of going to louder restaurants at busier times, going to quieter restaurants, and just explaining and educating my friends about the condition I had, and finding ways to work out at home or in quieter areas of the gym. And also by going back to listening to music at low volumes, and just things like turning down the volume on my phone so it wouldn't startle me when I got a text message. So basically, her approach was for me to focus on the things I can do and find ways around the things I could no longer do to kind of battle my depression. Um, and the last tip was to stop spending all my time on the internet researching and browsing through the forums and support groups. She explained to me that although it's important to educate myself about the condition, I can get the education I need through reputable websites, and medical professionals such as my audiologist, neuro-otologist, and herself. I then explained that I've been stressed out. Hold on one second. I then explained that I've been stressed out because I met a lot of people on the forums and Facebook groups that have suffered with this condition a lot longer than I have. They tell me that this condition is permanent and there is no cure. So she began to explain to me how the internet does not really accurately represent everyone with this condition as a whole. So only those who never recover find their way to the internet and post about their condition, whereas ones who do recover wouldn't post about or go online and post about their success story, because they would never find themselves researching to begin with. She also said that there are many barriers to recovery, such as overprotection, like using earplugs in normal sound environments, as well as fear of reaching out to an audiologist, and also many not having the resources for them to get help, as well as the fact that hyperacusis can be closely linked and fueled by anxiety. So there are many people who cannot conquer their fear of sound psychologically, and overall I was just so glad she explained this to me, because I never thought of how strongly the population of the internet and people on these forums and support groups could deviate from the actual representation of people who have hyperacusis, or people who had hyperacusis and recovered from. So I remember walking out of that appointment with my therapist, or psychologist rather, feeling the most positive I have ever felt since the onset of my hyperacusis. And I strictly followed the instructions from both my audiologist and psychologist. And after a couple weeks, I noticed that I could handle more sound with less pain. It could have just been the passage of time, but I truly do believe that the principles that my psychologist explained to me really helped me calm my nerves, and reduce my irrational fear of sound. I braced my body less for abrupt sounds, much less, which ended up lowering my anxiety. And now that I knew that just because I would feel discomfort, normal sounds do not cause further hearing damage. So I ended up modifying my lifestyle by asking to be seated in quieter areas of restaurants, lowering the volume on my phone so the ring wouldn't startle or hurt my ears, telling my friends about the condition so they could accommodate and provide support. And if things get loud, my friends would know to lower the volume, or could completely understand if I needed to step out for a bit. So I am really lucky to have friends that were very understanding. As far as going to the gym, I started going back to the gym and avoided the loud areas where there was a lot of weightlifters that would kind of slam their weights. And I started exercising outdoors as well. Just getting back to exercising 3 or 4 times a week lowered my stress, improved my sleep, and fought depression. Some studies even show that exercise helps circulation to the ear, which is beneficial for my hearing health. And I knew I had to quit my addiction of researching hyperacusis online. So I told my family and friends to hold me accountable if they saw me researching. And after a while, I completely stopped reading forums and support groups online. And I couldn't believe how much negativity that eliminated from my mindset. It was after that first successful month that I started to believe I could get better and will recover completely. So after 2 months of slight improvement, my audiologist called me in for an appointment because she received the TRT device for me to use. And the device was called a Sound Cure Serenade. She fitted me and personalized the tone specifically based on my tinnitus frequency. And I was supposed to use the device for a specific amount of time each day, and when I felt, as well as when I felt my ears were being bothered by sound. And after a couple months of using the TRT sound generators, each week I would bring up the volume little by little, almost similar to like weightlifting. And the idea behind the sound generator was to strengthen or retrain my ears to be able to handle more and more sound. And the TRT method was developed by a Polish researcher named Paul, I think it's called Jastreboff, and it has to do with a lot of brain plasticity, and it was originally designed to treat tinnitus, but it can be used as an effective treatment for hyperacusis as well. And although it takes a long time and it's almost impossible to notice the improvement day by day, I did continue to improve with the use of TRT treatment. And it was not something that you could notice, like, say, day by day, but it was something that I would notice through a couple of weeks. I would notice that I could handle a little bit more sound. But months went by, and I continued strictly abiding to the advice I received both from my audiologist and psychologist, as well as continued the use of my TRT devices, and I slowly but surely improved my sound tolerance and returned to my life before my trip to New York City. I even began to notice that I could be exposed for sounds for longer periods of time before my ears would feel full, and I'd get that feeling of sensory overload. But don't get me wrong, it was not an easy or straightforward, even with the tips I received. Multiple times a week I would encounter an unexpected loud sound that I could not be avoided, such as someone slamming a door, or a car with a loud exhaust driving by me, or someone dropping a plate. And each time this happened, I would get extremely anxious, and I was afraid that the loud noise could cause a setback that would eliminate all the recovery I achieved thus far. So months went by, and just like that, I would get improvement, and I would be exposed to a loud sound that would result in a setback that would last a few days, and then I would improve further. And it was a constant battle of like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And however, I noticed that the more time passed and the more I recovered, the more my ears would grow stronger and be more resilient to setbacks. And over the course of probably 100 mini setbacks, I always recovered past the setback and even improved further. So each and every month I would get better, and the improvement was so slight that it'd only be noticeable after a couple weeks, like I said before. But slowly but steadily I regained my life back from this horrendous condition. And after 3 or 4 months of tinnitus retraining therapy, or TRT, I felt that my sound tolerance was back to normal for the most part. So I returned my TRT devices back to my audiologist. She asked me how to rate how much my sound sensitivity affected my quality of life from 1 to 100 again, like I did when I saw her originally. And I said when I first scheduled my appointment, I rated it 100, but now that after abiding to the advice given to me by both her and my psychologist, I would say that it only affects me 20 out of 100. She said I made a marvelous recovery and should continue to do so as time passes. So at this point, around 8 months had passed since my initial trip to New York City, and I felt pretty much recovered for the most part, aside from some discomfort I would get from loud environments, such as a party full of people, or a bar playing music loudly, or loud action scenes of a movie in a movie theater. So months passed, and months passed even without the use of TRT devices, and I continued to slowly improve my sound intolerance. And that leads me to today, in which 10.5 months have passed since my initial trip to New York City, and I truly feel that I made a full recovery. I can do everything I used to without pain and discomfort, other than going to something like a loud club or concert, and something that wouldn't even be advisable to go to without hearing protection to begin with. But just to give you an idea, I can now go to bars and busy restaurants and ride airplanes without any discomfort or pain. And I really feel so blessed and lucky that I made a full recovery from such a debilitating condition. And as far as my tinnitus goes, I still have my tinnitus, but I fully habituated to it and no longer bothers me or causes me distress. Basically, I only hear it when I I go to bed, or I'm in like a silent room. It really just, I don't know, it just, I'm completely habituated to it, just like someone would be of the sound of a refrigerator running, or an air vent, an AC going on. You just kind of habituate it. And it doesn't bother you anymore. So luckily I fully habituated the tinnitus as well. So it was such a long road, and it was full of setbacks, and it really was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I really do believe I recovered not due to the tinnitus retraining therapy alone, but through the multifaceted treatment plan provided by my neuro-otologist, audiologist, and rehab psychologist, as well as strictly abiding to the 3 tips my audiologist gave me: not to overprotect by using hearing protection in normal hearing environments, using sound enrichment through the TRT treatment, and listening to white noise when I'm in silent environments, and sleeping, as well as knowing that normal sounds under 85 decibels cannot and will not cause further damage to my hearing health, and as well as the 3 tips given to me by my psychologist, such as stop being hypervigilant, and learn to relax my body instead of bracing myself for sounds like a door shutting, modifying my lifestyle in order to find ways to get back to what I did in the past. And when I say modify my lifestyle, I mean besides the use of hearing protection in normal sound environments. So finding workarounds that don't consist of using earplugs. And the third thing was, of course, quit researching and reading forums, which led to it consuming all my thoughts. And if you yourself have hyperacusis, like I said in the beginning of this video, I highly recommend you locate a neuro-otologist, or just, if you can't find a neuro-otologist, find an ear specialist, not an ear, nose, and throat doctor, because they're mostly surgeons and not really trained in neurological issues that affect the ear as well. So, and also, and the reason why I recommend you see a neuro-otologist or ear specialist is that the doctor will be able to run a series of comprehensive tests to rule out any serious medical problems, such as an acoustic neuroma or saccular dislocation, which could be the cause of it. And I'd also recommend finding an audiologist that is familiar with tinnitus retraining therapy, who can work alongside a rehab psychologist who is well versed in in-ear conditions like tinnitus and hyperacusis. I would have saved a lot of time, money, and stress if I knew this advice beforehand. Hyperacusis was by far the hardest thing I ever had to go through, and even though I no longer suffer from the condition, it taught me a lot about life. It taught me never to take my health for granted, the importance of hearing protection in excessively loud sound environments such as concerts and nightclubs, as well as mind over matter. And if you work hard and stick diligently to a plan, and believe you will recover despite the odds, you can and will do so. Because the road to recovery was such a long and grueling process, and that there were so many barriers to recovery, such as unable to be seen by the right medical professionals, not being well educated of all the tips since it's such a rare condition, being misguided through non-credible sources on the internet, and lastly having trouble sticking to the tips given to me by medical professionals. I truly believe that this is why there are so many chronic hyperacusis sufferers out there. But like I said, however, I can only speak for myself and my own personal journey. If I didn't get the great treatment under the medical professionals who specialize in my condition, and I didn't stick to all the instructions they gave me and have a positive outlook and truly believe I could and will get better, I honestly think I would still be suffering to this day. And I'd like to reiterate the fact that it was a combination of different levels of treatment that helped me make a full recovery. And unfortunately, as of now, there isn't a magic pill that you can take right now at this moment to kind of cure the sensitivity to sound, and same goes for tinnitus. But I think since I survived and made a recovery, I don't want anyone to have to feel isolated and hopeless like I did when I first discovered the condition. And I was first researching and trying to get more information. I feel like if it's my duty to share my journey with others on the internet, because even if only one person finds this video helpful, I'll feel accomplished, and this video will be worth it because I want you to know that you're not alone. And even though you may have hyperacusis, you certainly do not have to live with it, and it's not always a chronic condition. Again, I'm not a medical professional, and what has worked for me may not work for you, and everyone recovers at different paces, so take what you will, but I really do have faith in the treatment I received and its efficacy in providing me with a full recovery. I also recommend you check out hyperacusisresearch.org and follow or like their Facebook page. The organization is led by a researcher named Brian Pollard, and the organization is focused on finding a cure to stop noise-induced pain from hyperacusis. They even have a YouTube channel where they hosted a webinar with Dr. Salvi of the University of Buffalo, who has done intensive research on the topic of hyperacusis and tinnitus. It's something I definitely recommend you watching if you're interested in the most up-to-date research and what's going on as of now. The organization just created a roadmap for a cure, so it's very exciting that the progress is being made, even if it's in the early stages. Their biggest barrier right now is lack of money to fund the research to find a cure, so I highly recommend you support their organization through donation. And I'm not affiliated or endorsed with the organization, but I have faith in their mission. So I myself have donated to both Hyperacusis Research and the American Tinnitus Association, whose goal is to find a cure for tinnitus. And with as much attention hearing health has received recently, due to the widespread use of MP3 players, I truly believe a cure will be found in my lifetime. There are so many drug therapies that are coming down the pipeline in the clinical trial stage, particularly from the biotech companies Auris Medical and Autonomy Therapeutics, which you can look up. Along with great advancements in technology, there is more research being done on hearing health today more than ever. So this is really promising, and I think that's all I have for this video. I didn't want to leave anything out and really wanted to be as detailed as possible. So I'll post any helpful links in the video description box below, and I'll do my best to respond to comments, so feel free to ask any questions. But yeah, thanks for watching this video, and I really hope you find it helpful and wish you the best of luck.